Hello and welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. So, a great pleasure to welcome today's program, Greg Lanyard, who is Director of Product Management at Manhattan Associates. And today we're going to talk about making TMS an investment and an enterprise priority. TMS has been around for a long time, but historically, TMS has had to battle for investments priorities within the enterprise, whether it was ERP or CRM back in the day, or other forms of enterprise solutions. But today, a lot of companies are discovering, and sometimes the hard way, that TMS really truly needs to be an investment priority and an enterprise priority for a variety of different factors. And that's going to be the focus of our conversation today with Greg. He's going to talk to us in terms of why it's important to make TMS an enterprise priority. Talk a little bit about the different stakeholders and kind of the business case and why it's important, why it should be important to them as well. And then talk about what's new and exciting around TMS and some of the things that companies ought to be looking forward to in the months and years ahead here. So, I've known Greg for a long time, expert in this area. So it's great to have him on the program. So, Greg, welcome.
Yep. Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate you having me on today.
Greg, as a first-time guest on the program, as I always do whenever we bring someone new on, I like to kind of, just for the benefit of the audience, to provide them with some perspective on terms of your experience and how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics to begin with. So why don't we start there real briefly? Tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Manhattan.
Sure, will do. So my career path actually began at Penn State University. I studied supply chain management with a curriculum that was heavily focused on transportation at the time. My first job out of school was traveling the country implementing TMS, mostly in the CPG and retail space, for one of the pioneer solution providers that was in that space at the time, a company called Manugistics. So I did that for about 4 years on the consulting side, and then I moved over to the product development side, and I've been focused on TMS product management and strategy ever since. My current role is Director of Product Management at Manhattan Associates, as you mentioned. So I own the vision and the strategy for our TMS, and I'm the product champion to all of our internal and external solution stakeholders, so customers, R&D, sales, marketing, as well as our partners.
Great. I must say you're probably one of the few guests that I've had that actually studied supply chain logistics at the university level. I mean, obviously that's becoming much more common today, but back when you and I first got started, it wasn't as common. So you were one of the early adopters of getting an educational background in that area, and of course, implementing TMS solutions, being in the front lines of that. Certainly gives you a wealth of experience and insight in terms of how to do it right and some of the mistakes companies make, obviously, and how that filters through to your current role now in product development, right?
That's right. I wish I could admit to knowing that it would be such a boom as it was 20 plus years ago, but I got lucky with that, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've got kids who are just beginning to think about college, and I'm trying to steer them in that direction, but we'll see what happens. All right, so let's dive into the topic now, Greg, and let's start with a basic question, right? Why is making TMS a priority more important today than in the past? I mean, what factors are driving this trend?
Sure. It's probably smart to start off with really what hasn't changed, right? So the fact that a TMS offers such an array of different value propositions, any of which positively impact operations. So whether it be reducing transportation costs or improving service and visibility, streamlining execution, lowering operational risk, right? All of these things that we know and hear in the industry, better reporting, analytics, management by exception. These are all things that have allowed TMS to thrive, right, and prosper over the years. What I've seen certainly over those years is that over the course of time, no matter where a company is in its maturity level, so whether they're very antiquated or advanced in their transportation processes, TMS will help you move further along the curve, right? So I liken it to the evolution of man diagram, if you can picture that, right? So where are you today in that evolution, and where can a modern TMS take you? So are you still, kind of monkeying around with those manual processes that are out there, or are you being creative with tools that are available to help you be innovative and to thrive? Most companies are probably stuck somewhere in the middle, right? So, TMS, as I've seen it, has been the answer to getting out of that, middle stage or that missing link, if you will. So you ask what's changed, right? So first I'd say, supply chains are really more dynamic than ever before. And because of that, they're more complex, right? So we have more volatility in our country, in the world, and hence in our supply chains. And that really equals more risk. So we need to be more nimble, we need to react, and we need to be more prepared for when that change hits us. You hear more about supply chain failures in the media than ever before. It's more visible, whether it be port closures or natural disasters, impact of, consolidations and mergers that are going on, new regulations that are causing change. TMS allows for, that adaptation that's necessary, and it really helps prepare and facilitate such change. A second area is really, probably customer expectations, right? They're higher than ever. We read about it throughout the industry. We see shorter lead times, next day and same day delivery requirements. We're truly, not only in our personal lives, but in the business world, in this instant gratification mode, right? And that's really the new norm. And TMS provides the optimization and the visibility to, orders, to shipments, wherever they may be headed. I'd probably say a third area is around technology. It's advanced in such ways that we now have information available to us from systems and from trading partners that we either couldn't get in a timely and inexpensive manner just a few years ago. So, that's just another big change. And then you can look at the tech side, right? TMS is obviously more accessible today to the masses than it ever has been before. Like you and I have discussed in the past, right, with cloud deployment models, companies with $25 million spends are now able to implement TMS, so the market is widened from that perspective. And then, you also have, I think, just generally speaking, a new accountability, at the top of organizations for transportation and logistics. Specifically in transportation, it's truly being looked at now as an area of true competitive advantage, right? It can be a differentiator for companies. So these are all things that, really didn't, kind of hit the top of the page in the past, and they're really new areas that are causing TMS to really be, put up there. There's a lot of other things I could probably talk about. I'll close it out with e-commerce, just because I'd be wrong to not mention it. It's truly changing the game from a transportation and logistics perspective. There's a need to reassess your supply chain like there never has been before. How do I optimize transportation? How do I optimize the solutions that are interacting with the warehouse, with transportation? You don't have to look past, the Amazon.com story to understand some of that change, and, how they, they're not a retailer, they're a logistics company, and they're recognizing that, right? So, somewhat basic question, but, somewhat of a long answer.
Yeah, no, I think you touched upon, so many different factors there. I mean, you talked about risk, right? And that becoming a factor, right? For more and more companies. You talked about e-commerce, right? Obviously, and that's, changing the dynamics of a lot of transportation operations, not only for retailers, but for manufacturers as well. I mean, I kind of look at it this way. I mean, I think today you can pick up something like the Wall Street Journal, and just about every single day you can find an article or two, or maybe even more, that has transportation management written all over it, if you will, or transportation management has got an impact of some sort in it. So I think the link between transportation management and, obviously the financial success and the strategic success of companies is becoming much more visible and much more apparent for companies. But on the flip side, I mean, in light of all these things, I mean, it still amazes me how many companies, still don't have, a TMS or haven't made it a priority. I mean, what have been some of the hurdles, and then how do you overcome them?
Yeah, you're right. And, you read reports that's sort of been out there for a number of years now. And I think you recently wrote about this, right? It falls in the 35% range of companies that are using a TMS. and that's the number we've been using in that range for many, many years. It's hard to pin the tail on that donkey as to why that number hasn't changed, and I won't try to answer that one per se. But what I can tell you from my experience in interacting with customers, prospects, it's that manual processes still exist in way too many companies out there that I talk to. Many are still looking for their first TMS to replace those processes. What I find interesting, I think, is that the folks that you talk to at these companies that may be implementing their first TMS, they're folks that have been through TMS implementations before. So whether they're past roles or former companies, so that the experience level is there in terms of the resources, but there are still companies that are sort of late bloomers to turn the tides and start implementing. But I'll say that the times are certainly changing. I think the hurdles, of what's been preventing it in the past, but like I said, it's changing. You've got cost and you've got change management. I think those are the two obvious ones. Costs from a structure perspective, cloud deployment models, subscription-based pricing, these have certainly helped open up new markets for TMS and other supply chain apps for that matter. On the change management side, just through conversations that I've had in the past, I think, companies are often just set in their ways and processes. They have that weird, different mentality, and there's some concern for what impact change will have on their operations, specifically in transportation. So, what I think around accountability is that there's new accountability, there's new proof points, right, that have been put out there by companies of all sizes across all industries using TMS, and there's success stories that are out there. So I think those hurdles are being overcome. We're certainly seeing it, and the demand for TMS is still out there, which is a good thing. It's kept me in the industry this long. And, that's kind of where things stand. I guess the only other area is probably around, talent. Maybe another area where, change management has been a concern historically is that, the thought and misperception that TMS is too complex for maybe my users, right? And the reality is that, TMS has become easier to implement. It's become quicker to implement, and our supply chain management professionals are coming out and from school and more ready than ever, as we already discussed. So I think all of those things are changing for the better. We, for example, at Manhattan just recently did a workshop at MIT on transportation optimization as part of their supply chain masters program. So these are the types of things that are happening more so in the academia world that are helping folks be more prepared to hit the ground running when they come out of school.
Yeah, that's a great point. There in terms of we're certainly seeing over the past few years university programs leveraging some of these enterprise solutions within their both undergraduate and graduate programs. So people are entering the business world already with experience using TMS applications, and they see what the value is. So I think that's another, to your point, that's another factor that's lowering some of those historical, hurdles, and easing some of those change management challenges that have always existed and continue to exist today. So let's talk about some of the stakeholders, now, obviously in addition to, transportation and logistics executives being interested in transportation management or, these solutions, there are a lot of other, stakeholders involved in building the business case for TMS and getting, the most value from it. So let's start with the CIO, right? From an IT, perspective. I mean, how does the TMS align, with the challenges and objectives that CIOs face today?
Sure. So, I think we're talking here about a decision to align platforms, align technology, right? And finding a partner that's right, not only for my solution and needs today, but for 5+ years, down the line. So how do I find a flexible solution that scales with the business as my business is going to grow, right? So, supply chain platform solutions really fulfill this requirement best, in my opinion. You get common architecture, you get common business objects, right? You've got cloud deployment models that help reduce the load on staffing of different IT projects that are out there. So all of these different things, as well as just the reduction of infrastructure costs, that they're all things that are on the mind of that CIO, excuse me. But also important is innovation, right, and keeping up with new technology trends. And is the solution provider going to align strategies and continue to enhance the solution, in line with where the company may be going. In the end, it's really about long-term project viability, right? With TMS, we're talking about a very intertwined system. It's not a black box. It touches upstream and downstream systems, and it's really critical to daily operations. So all of these things have to be considered, and that's really what's on the CIO's mind to make sure that the right solution is implemented.
Now, are you seeing, generally speaking, I mean, I think there's always been a lot of discussion early on, particularly with cloud or software as a service, and how that was going to be viewed upon by CIOs. I mean, what do you, in particular as it relates to TMS, right? I mean, are CIOs today kind of cloud just being a much more, something that's more on the table, for them as a option that they're more willing to embrace?
It definitely is. The concerns that were brought to the table early on with cloud and security, which was the main one. Those have definitely gone by the wayside. I don't know if companies were waiting, and seeing kind of an attitude, or whether they really had legitimate concerns for security. But that is just not a roadblock anymore to companies moving forward. I think the benefits clearly outweigh, those concerns from a costing perspective, from a resourcing perspective. So, the CIO definitely can now fit a TMS project into the mix a lot easier than he could have before, with the competing projects that we know are always out there in the supply chain and outside of it. So.
Right. You mentioned, innovation. And I think that, when I think about this, and I think about, again, from an IT perspective, a CIO perspective, the ability for platforms or whatever solution you're talking about to be, easily flexible, adaptable, right? It used to be that, if the business process changed, or you need to make, some kind of innovation from the IT front, you had to wait for IT to come and help you, right? And IT had limited resources, or it could take weeks or months. Sometimes it was at the bottom of the priority list, or would never get done. I think what you're seeing today with these more modern, platforms and architectures is the ability to almost empower the end users to do some of these configurations and this innovation, themselves, which kind of lowers the burden on the IT staff a bit as well. Did you see that as well?
Absolutely, right. So you hit on two key points, right? One is just the pure usability, the user experience of TMSs has just gotten to a much more mature point. There's been a focus, in the last several years on that aspect of it. And then, the other is the fact that, the tasks, the actions, the business processes that are being supported by TMS are being, built around the business user. So, more is just being put on the UI, if you will, the front end, the user interface, to allow the business user to understand more simpler the configurations that used to be more complex, but now are sort of dumbed down for the business user, if you will.
Right. So ultimately, as with all investments, the conversation ultimately turns to the ROI and dollars and cents, and obviously that's where the CFO comes in. So, and that's another kind of important stakeholder here, right? I mean, why should CFOs make TMS an enterprise priority?
Sure. So, right, with the CFO, now we're talking about total cost of ownership. We're talking about return on investment, financial stability of the partner that you may select to help support all of your key operational processes. I think, generally speaking, right, the ROI around TMS has been more heavily advertised and proven than for many other IT projects, even supply chain application projects that are out there. And there's a few reasons for that. We have excellent data points. We're a mature solution. We've got analysts and third-party perspectives that are, documented well out there. It's a mature solution. It's been, seeing constant investment for, more than 2 decades now. Talking numbers, right? 5 to 25% is kind of the accepted and suggested range of savings, and that can come from, as I mentioned, a variety of different ways. You know, recent reports have even stated that the ROI, the actual realized ROI from TMS, is on the uptick. It's on the rise. So people are starting to get more benefit than even before. But, you know, to answer your question specifically, I think, you know, there are many different opportunities for those returns, and the savings that you get from TMS, you know, go beyond just an initial implementation, right? There's incremental savings that can be realized year over year that help the cause from a CFO perspective. And again, here I'm talking about the fact that we all know supply chains change. We know that the business changes, and being able to tune the solution to quickly adapt and change and take advantage of those changes from an optimization or visibility perspective, whatever it might be. You know, these are things that allow for continued ROI, not just a one and done type scenario. And TMS is, you know, is pretty well known for the ability to handle that. You know, I think you also look at things like, you know, business unit rollouts, right? Expansions, trading partners being added to the mix, economic conditions that lead to, you know, different shifts in, you know, business processes. All of these things, right, are ways that TMS, again, adapts and can quickly provide that ROI needed year over year. So, you know, I hope that answers your question. I think that's sort of online with, you know, the CFO's mentality.
Yeah, no, you know, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, I mean, what I always hear from folks is, you know, from transportation executives that have been successful in this area is, you know, you ultimately have to put in the language that the CFO understands, right? And that is linking the TMS and transportation to specific items on the P&L and balance sheet, right? So if you can make that connection, you know, that's going to be, you know, you're going to be much more successful than if you're not able to make that connection. And I think secondly, you brought up a point in terms of, you know, companies seeing greater value today from a TMS perhaps in the past. And where I'm seeing that a little bit is, obviously, I think it's been well documented on the cost saving side of how TMS kind of helps in that area. You know, kind of more broadly speaking, I think one of the things that we're seeing in the industry is logistics kind of being viewed as a competitive weapon, and transportation being part of that. And not only being as a lever for cost savings, but also as a weapon to drive top line sales, as a way to drive revenue growth, right? You know, we're offering, you know, free 2-day shipping, for example. You know, I think that's probably the most, you know, obvious example out there, even though there is no such thing as free. And a lot of companies obviously end up losing money as opposed to that. But I think there are ways that you can, if you do it smartly, you can leverage transportation and logistics more broadly as a way to drive top line growth. Are you seeing that in kind of with the customers you're working with?
Yeah, no doubt about it, Adrian. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's exactly what folks are, you know, thinking about, what they're considering. And, you know, if there is a challenge, or, you know, there shouldn't be in sort of finding that value prop and where the returns could come from, you know, we have structured means to help easily evaluate where are your current operations, you know, provide a value assessment for where we think you can get to, and help with, you know, what would that potential return be. So all of those things are available today based on the, you know, the history, the data that we have from past implementations and such. So it's all good.
Yep. Well, you know, now let's talk about the most obvious stakeholder, which is, you know, the chief supply chain officer, or, you know, some other senior executive that's involved, you know, responsible and has accountability for, you know, broader, you know, supply chain, you know, performance. I mean, with so many different, you know, moving parts and processes involved in supply chain management, I mean, how should, you know, chief supply chain officers view transportation management systems and its value and importance, you know, today?
Yeah, you know, I don't think standalone the value prop for a TMS needs to be explained to a supply chain executive by any means, right? That they've probably been through it before if they've made it to that level. But, you know, you look at their job and their task at hand, and owning and orchestrating an entire supply chain. I mean, you've got tens, if not thousands, of trading partners. You've got so many mission critical systems and facilities that you need to manage and understand, you know, what's happening. It's truly, you know, quite a challenge by no means. You know, the CSCO, they're an artist, they're a scientist, they're a mathematician, all kind of rolled up into one. You look at TMS, he or she is considering how new and innovative, solutions can adapt to the business as the business changes, how complex algorithms, are going to help reduce costs year over year, how efficiencies, are going to be gained, leveraging that technology and being able to break down barriers between the functional silos that they own, right? Warehousing and transportation and yard management and order management. So, you could look at one solution for each of those, but, it's the CSCO's job to really figure out, what's the best combination of those solutions. So, like I said, standalone TMS, the value prop is well known, but I think the value of a supply chain platform, right, that provides the transportation management, the warehouse management, yard, distributed order management, right? These are, and other complementary functions that are, all mixed in. These are the differentiators, right? These are the things that can impact operations. And that's the important conversation to have when, the CSEO is really looking at making change.
Yeah, no, great point. When I talk to, chief supply chain officers or senior VPs of supply chain, more than ever, it's always been the case that from a supply chain perspective, you're always trying to balance, transportation with inventory, with labor costs, right? And even risks now, right? And then it's a very complex, formula, and that formula continues to shift and change, over time. So, my perspective is that, looking at it purely from a transportation standpoint, is that they're trying to take a more holistic view, right? So whereas in the past, it might have been, okay, inbound is separate than outbound, private fleet separate than common carrier. Even more recently, e-commerce operations is separate than our store operations, right? Now it's, trying to kind of look at the bigger picture. And then to your point, it's the recognition that transportation doesn't operate in a silo, that, you've got warehouses involved and what's happening, the processes involved there. On the front end, you've got order management and what's happening, particularly from that, orders coming from stores, or orders coming from websites, fulfillment models that are now, things. We wrote recently about drop shipping and how that's becoming much more, prevalent. So it's this added complexity and broader perspective, and how to manage that more intelligently and more efficiently, I think is what's on the table for them. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. The job is not getting any easier, for sure. And all of those systems really, and the way that they interact with each other, and, the way information is shared amongst those systems, it all really needs to be, reevaluated to try to squeeze out any of those, latency issues or integration issues, that have been dealt with in the past. So definitely.
Great. So let's shift gears now and talk about, what's new and exciting in the world of TMS. It's been around for a while, as you and I know, but there's constant innovation, taking place in the industry. Can you kind of share some perspective in terms of, some of the newer capabilities that are out there, and the value proposition, and kind of the value that they're providing, some of the companies you work with?
Yeah, sure. So, a lot of exciting things happening in the space now. You certainly have some of the more futuristic things that we'll save for another conversation, things that haven't exactly hit the mass market yet. And, you can speculate on those with drones and driverless trucks, et cetera. But I think more of the realistic scenarios of what people are implementing with TMS today are, the big one is around IoT and mobility, right? Dealing with real-time visibility. It's not something necessarily new to transportation or TMS, but the tracking expectations and requirements are on the rise, and sort of the bar has been set to a new level now. There's really no excuses for for no matter how big or small a carrier or what mode you're on, right? The technology exists, so small carriers can provide the same level of service and information that large carriers have been doing. And there's always a need for these small and medium-sized carriers out there for one reason or another, right? Every large shipper is using them to some extent. I've seen a specific push in the food industry due to new regulations, new service requirements. There's a need for better compliance and in-transit visibility. You've got FSMA. out there, right, which is helping to drive some of that. You've got other companies that are just looking at, short shelf life product or customer based, needs, high volume sellers, things that are driving the need for, maybe only a certain portion of the business to be tracked, truly real time every few minutes, whereas others might be an hour or so. But knowing where that product is, knowing the temperature of it in transit at all times, these are some of the great new capabilities that are coming to market. I think the in other areas around strategic planning, again, it's something that's sort of been out there for some time. However, the idea that companies are now spending more time on that type of what if analysis, and I think truthfully, it's because TMSs have become more efficient and it's allowing planners to spend more time on this type of exercise and activity. But looking at contingency planning, as I mentioned before, with risk and volatility, it's becoming more important. Supply chains are just more dynamic. So being able to adapt more quickly to the changing environment that's out there is really what strategic planning is allowing folks to do. And, as a few examples of that, companies are looking at ways that they can more optimize their fleets. A lot of our customers are really focusing in on fleet operations, their outbound distribution networks, trying to reduce miles, variable costs, anywhere from 2 to 5%. And that makes a big difference in the bottom line. Looking at store deliveries from a retail perspective, are the days that I'm delivering the optimal days, or the time windows of the stores, preventing me from optimizing, as well as am I sending product from the right distribution center to those stores, right? So facility sourcing type decisions. Another area is, and I think you just put something out today around dedicated fleet modeling, right? Or just, making the choice of dedicated versus private versus contract carrier, right? So understanding the cost and allocation of the resources that I have, that's another area around strategically, understanding that. So, some of those, are some of the key things that I'm certainly seeing with our customers. I think the main change, like I said, in this space is just the priority that's now being given to this and the frequency of analysis. Maybe it was looked at as, something to do once a year in the past. It's really being done, quarterly or monthly now, because the supply chain is changing so much, and that, you need to react to those changes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great, I think that brings us full circle. I mean, I think the fact that companies are looking at TMS and some of the capabilities to look at it from a more strategic perspective, do some of these what if analysis, look at it through a risk management lens, right? Having that real-time visibility and more real-time visibility in certain parts of their network, as required. I mean, I think all those things, filter back up to why, making TMS an enterprise priority is important, today. Greg, we're running short on time here, so I'm just going to go to my last question here as a way to wrap up. For companies that haven't made an investment in TMS or haven't made it a priority, or companies that are simply looking to move up, the transportation operations to a higher performance level. I mean, what action should they take today to start heading in the right direction?
Good question. Yeah. So, my advice would be to sort of start with more bottom-up collaboration, right? The more I talk to folks at the higher levels of organizations and then sit down with planners, I think what needs to happen is folks need to get in a room with the folks that are on the front lines, the people managing the operations every day, those dealing with fires, those dealing with the antiquated processes that are out there. Define what the high level workflows are that users are going through to execute their tasks, right? Understand the requirements that are needed. What are hard constraints? What are soft constraints? And what's taking time in their day, right? And are those the most efficient use? Is that the most efficient use of their time? I think then take it to the next level and you document pain points, you prioritize them. Is it a planning problem? Is it an execution problem? Is it visibility, analytics, right? These are all the things that transportation, as we've talked about, can help solve, but you have to identify the problem first. And then once you have all that, look at the metrics that you're measuring against, and do you have the right metrics? What do you need to improve? And then take all that information and build an RFP, right, that defines what are today's requirements. But as part of that, don't assume that today's processes and constraints are the processes and constraints of tomorrow. You have to have an open mind. You have to realize that implementing software is just part of the process, right? You have to have some change management, as I talked about. I think summing it up, if you haven't looked at a TMS in the last few years, you're probably unaware of the full scope of processes and capabilities that are out there. There's advancements that have been made, technology, deployment models, the modular nature of implementation, right? Time to market, user experience, all of these things that we've talked about that, provide the ROI that executives should be looking for to help make business more efficient and effective. So, no doubt in my mind, it's time to make TMS a priority.
Great. Well, I'm biased in this respect because I've been, making that same point, now for 18 years, and I think that, and I think the market is finally listening. So it's great, and I think you're right. I mean, I think I would echo that same thing. I think if you haven't looked at the TMS solutions in a few years, and certainly if you don't have one in place today, I think it's important to kind of take a look at the market, understand kind of where we are today from a technology standpoint, understand how companies are leveraging TMSs today because they're different than it was in the past, and then all the great recommendations you just made in terms of how to get started. So, Greg, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always manage to scratch the surface on this topic, but I think we got a good head start today, and I want to thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me, Adrian. Good luck with everything.
Great. Thank you. And I want to thank those of you that joined us today. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Manhattan Associates website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question for Greg, you can post a question there. And I'm sure that Greg will be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Bye now.